August 1941. The forest near Dinsk was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Tall pine trees stood like silent soldiers. The morning air smelled of dirt, smoke and boiled grain. Somewhere far away guns were firing, but here in this small clearing, there was only one man and a field kitchen. Ivan Sareta stirred a large iron pot with a long ladle. Steam rose slowly into the cold air. Inside the pot was buckwheat soup. It was not perfect, but it was warm. In those days, warm food mattered more than taste. Ivan moved calmly as if the war did not exist. His sleeves were rolled up. His hands were big and strong, stained with soot and grease. Ivan was a cook. Nothing more, nothing less. Behind him stood the field kitchen on two wheels. Next to it, leaning against the wooden frame, was an axe. It was not a weapon. It was a tool. A simple carpenter's axe used to chop firewood. The handle was smooth from months of use. Ivan tasted the soup. He frowned. "Needs salt," he muttered. He did not hear the tank at first. The sound came slowly like a distant storm. A low vibration in the ground. The birds stopped singing. Ivan froze, the ladle still in his hand. He listened. Metal tracks. An engine. Not Soviet. Ivan's eyes narrowed. From the trees on the western side of the clearing, a gray shape appeared. Then another. Two German Panzer-38 tanks rolled forward, crushing bushes under their tracks. White crosses were painted clearly on their sides. The German war machine had arrived. Inside the lead tank, the crew felt no fear. They had been advancing for weeks. Villages burned. Soviet units ran. Resistance was weak. This was just another forest, another empty place. Then the commander saw the smoke. He raised his binoculars and laughed. "There's someone cooking," he said in German. "A cook." The tank slowed. The second Panzer turned slightly and continued toward the road, but the lead tank rolled into the clearing. The engine roared once more, then stopped. Silence fell hard and heavy. Ivan was standing near the kitchen now. He did not run. He did not hide. He held the ladle in his right hand. The German commander opened the hatch and stood up. He scanned the clearing. No soldiers. No guns. No movement. Just a field kitchen, a horse tied to a tree, and one large man in a dirty apron. The Germans laughed. "He's only a cook," one of them said. Another added, "Look at him. He's making soup for ghosts." The commander waved his hand. "Food," he said. "Fresh food." The hatches opened. One by one, 4 German soldiers climbed out of the tank. They stretched their legs. They smiled. They joked loudly. Their submachine guns stayed inside the turret. There was no danger here. Ivan watched them. From the outside he looked slow. Heavy. Ordinary. Inside his heart was beating fast. 10 meters. That was the distance between him and the tank. Ivan looked at the rifle leaning against the kitchen wheel. A bolt-action rifle. Good against men. Useless against steel. If he fired, he might kill one. The others would jump back inside and turn him into dust. He looked down at the ladle in his hand. Then his eyes moved slightly to the left. The axe. The Germans walked closer to the kitchen. One of them lifted the lid of the pot. Steam hit his face. "Smells good," he said, laughing. Ivan lowered the ladle and placed it carefully on the edge of the pot. Slowly he reached behind his back. His fingers wrapped around the wooden handle of the axe. The Germans did not notice. They were too busy laughing. One soldier dipped the ladle into the soup. "The cook will serve us," he joked. "This is Russia now." Ivan took one step forward. Then another. The German nearest to him finally looked up. For a moment their eyes met. The German opened his mouth to shout. Ivan moved. He did not scream. He did not hesitate. He ran. The distance closed fast. 10 meters became 5. The axe was raised high, not like a tool but like a promise. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The German shouted, "Russian!" Panic exploded. The laughter died instantly. The Germans turned and ran back toward the tank. One slipped. Another slammed into the hull. The commander reached for the hatch, trying to pull himself inside. Ivan was already there. He swung. Not at the man. At the tank. The axe struck steel with a sound like a church bell. Clang. The hatch slammed shut. The locks clicked. The Germans were inside. Ivan stood alone outside, holding an axe. The tank engine roared back to life. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. Most men would have run. Ivan did not. He grabbed the side of the tank and began to climb. And in that moment, as the steel monster moved beneath him, the laughing was over. The cook was no longer a joke. The hunt had begun. The forest settled again after the crash of steel. but the echo of Ivan Tsarita's axe still lingered in the air. Smoke curled from the field kitchen, carrying the scent of boiled buckwheat, fried pork and burnt firewood. Birds returned cautiously, and the wind whispered through the pines. But Ivan did not notice. His eyes were sharp, scanning the tank like a predator studying its prey. To the soldiers around him, Ivan Tsarita was just a cook. He did not carry a pistol. He did not wear a uniform with medals. He had no training in guns or explosives. Yet, in the chaos of that morning he had become something else. Something no one had expected. Months before, Ivan had been like any other man in the 91st Tank Regiment. Large, strong and silent, he moved through the regiment quietly, chopping wood and stirring soup. He had requested transfer to a combat unit 3 times. Each time he had been refused. "Tsarita," the commanding officer had said, "we have plenty of soldiers with rifles. We don't need another man with an axe." And so, Ivan stayed in the kitchen. He carried his resentment quietly, shaping it with each swing of the axe into the firewood. He dreamed of fighting at the front, of facing the Germans, of proving himself, but the regiment needed him where he was. The men needed their meals. The soldiers teased him endlessly. "Look at him," they said watching Ivan chop wood. "We fight with cannons and he fights with a spoon." "Careful, Ivan," another joked. "If the Germans come, you'll drown them in soup." Ivan never got angry. He smiled, wiped his brow and replied simply, "A soldier cannot fight on an empty stomach. I will feed them. You kill the fascists." But inside, the fire of frustration burned. He had the strength of 10 men, and yet his hands only served ladles and knives for cooking. He wondered if he would ever see the front, or if he would stay forever behind the kitchen, invisible to the war, yet surrounded by it. The regiment had been retreating through Latvia. Every day they moved back, pushed by the relentless advance of the German blitzkrieg. Soldiers were exhausted. Their uniforms were dirty, caked with blood and dust. They were hungry, thirsty, and afraid. The only comfort, the only piece of normal life they had, was the field kitchen. And Ivan was its heart. That morning, August 14th, had been like any other. Orders came from division headquarters. The regiment was moving north, flanked by German armored units. Engines roared in the distance. Soldiers scrambled to their tanks, checking tracks and cannons, readying themselves for the day. Ivan was given 10 minutes to pack up the kitchen, but the buckwheat was not ready. He pleaded for 1 hour. 1 hour to finish cooking. The commander looked at the rising smoke in the sky, at the anxious faces of his men, and nodded. Ivan had 1 hour. The regiment left. Only Ivan remained, alone with his horse and his kitchen. The forest was silent. Not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that felt like a predator was waiting, patient and deadly. Ivan checked the fire. He stirred the pot. He tasted the soup. Then he heard it, the vibration low at first like a warning from the earth itself. Metal tracks on dry ground. The high-pitched whine of a Maybach engine. His heart beat faster. Not Soviet. German. He grabbed the reins of the horse, guiding it into the trees. He looked toward the forest edge. 2 gray tanks appeared, Panzer-38s. The lead tank slowed, engine idling, while the second continued on scouting duty. 4 German soldiers climbed from the turret, confident. Laughing. Relaxed. They thought the clearing was empty. They thought Ivan was just a man with a ladle. Ivan's fingers brushed the wooden handle of the axe leaning against the kitchen wheel. The axe had been his companion for months. Heavy, 2 kilograms, sharpened from use. It was not a weapon, but it could be. Today it would be. The Germans laughed again, teasing each other as they bent over the pot of soup. Ivan moved silently behind the trailer, his eyes never leaving the tank crew. One of the soldiers dipped the ladle into the soup. Steam curled around his face. They were careless, arrogant. They did not notice the giant man beside them, ready to change everything. Then Ivan ran. He ran like a storm breaking free, crossing 10 meters in seconds. The nearest German soldier shouted. Panic spread instantly. The laughter was gone. Confused, they scrambled for the tank. One fell. Another slammed against the hull. The commander reached for the hatch, trying to pull himself inside. But Ivan was faster. He swung the axe against the steel hull. The sound rang like a church bell. The hatch slammed. The locks clicked. The Germans were trapped inside. Ivan climbed onto the moving tank. He hammered at the machine gun barrel with the axe. He shattered the vision blocks. The tank rocked violently as the crew panicked. He shouted, pretending to be a battalion of men, ordering grenades and reinforcements that didn't exist. Inside, the Germans were blind, terrified, convinced they were surrounded by a Soviet strike team. Ivan used every moment, every move to manipulate fear. When the Germans finally surrendered, it was only Ivan, alone with an axe, a field kitchen, and a horse. The regiment returned. Soldiers gaped in disbelief. A tank captured, for enemy soldiers tied like children, and Ivan Sareta stirring his soup as if nothing had happened. That single act transformed him. The cook, mocked and dismissed, had become a legend. But Ivan knew the war was not over. He had won a battle, not the war. The German column would return. The real danger had only begun. Yet inside a new feeling grew. Confidence. Power. A sense that the man behind the ladle was more than anyone had ever believed. For the first time Ivan Sareta smiled, not just at the soup but at the war itself. He was ready. The forest was quiet again but the air was tense. Smoke rose from the captured Panzer-38, curling around the trees like a ghost. Ivan Sareta stood beside it, hands on the axe and rifle. His breathing was steady but his mind raced. He knew this was only the beginning. The first tank had been captured, yes, but the German column that had left behind scouts would not forgive this humiliation. They would return, and soon. The sun had climbed higher, but the forest still cast long shadows. Ivan's horse grazed silently nearby, tethered to a tree. His eyes scanned the distant road. He had already memorized the tracks in the dirt. Heavy, wide, unmistakably German. There were more tanks. More men. And they were coming fast. Ivan moved carefully around the captured tank. The Panzer-38 sat like a dead animal, gray steel glinting in the sun. Its hatches were closed, the crew tied inside, still shaking. The smell of fuel and burnt metal hung in the air. Ivan crouched behind the tank, examining the road ahead. He had seconds to decide. The regiment could not return in time. Only he was here. He dug quickly into his belt and pulled out some rope from the kitchen supplies. He tied the captured Germans together, making sure they could not escape, then positioned them near the trees where they could not be seen by the enemy. The Germans trembled, whispering prayers in their language. Ivan ignored them. Focus. Precision. Come. That was what this fight demanded. Far off, a cloud of dust rose from the horizon. The main German column was approaching. Engines roared. Tanks rolled forward, the sun reflecting off steel tracks and armored hulls. Infantry marched alongside, rifles ready, shouting commands to one another. The lead Panzer-38 that Ivan had captured had only been a taste of what was coming. Ivan's mind raced. There was no time for hesitation. He had no heavy weapons, no artillery, and only a handful of grenades. But he had what the Germans could not see. Cunning. He understood fear. He understood their expectations. And he had the element of surprise. He looked at the captured tank. Then at the clearing. Then back at the road. The forest formed a natural choke point. Narrow, enclosed, perfect. If the Germans drove through, they would be trapped. If they dismounted to fight, they would be exposed. Ivan made his plan. He would use the captured Panzer-38 as bait, the forest as cover, and his ingenuity as a weapon. The first vehicles appeared. A Panzer-38 rolled toward the clearing, unaware of the trap. Ivan waited, crouched behind a thick pine. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He had practiced patience over years of chopping wood and stirring soup. Now that patience became deadly. He shouted suddenly, mimicking a battalion. Prepare the charges. Surround them. Fire. The words echoed in the forest. Soldiers hidden among the trees would have answered. The Germans froze, unsure. They could see no one. Only the smoke from the previous skirmish. Only the sound of their own engines. Panic set in. Ivan's voice carried the illusion of hundreds. In reality it was one man, one cook, standing in the shadows. A lead Tiger tank approached, heavier, larger, more lethal. Its gun turret swung slowly, scanning the clearing. Ivan adjusted his position, hiding behind ferns and broken logs. He could see the infantry following, advancing carefully, rifles raised. They were confident. They were blind. They had no idea what waited for them in the shadows. Ivan waited until the column reached the choke point. Then he acted. First, a grenade rolled down a slope into the path of the lead half-track. It exploded, sending a burst of flame into the air. The infantry scattered. Soldiers screamed. The tank stopped, engine idling nervously. Ivan remained hidden, silent, watching every move. His heart beat steadily. The Germans were panicking, trapped in a space where their heavy armor could not maneuver. Then he fired a signal flare from his trench. The regiment was returning. T-26 tanks appeared through the trees, engines roaring, taking positions on the high ground. Ivan had bought them time. His solo fight had prevented the regiment from walking into an ambush. Every swing of his axe, every shout, every calculated move had delayed the enemy. The German commander in the lead tank cursed. His eyes darted from the blocked road to the smoke in the trees. He had expected an easy march. Instead he faced chaos. The captured Panzer-38 sat on the side of the road like a silent witness to his defeat. His men were confused, trapped, and scared. Ivan emerged briefly, just enough to be seen, holding his rifle and axe. He shouted orders, tapping into their fear, making them think reinforcements were everywhere. Every movement was calculated. Every shout, every step turned panic into paralysis. The Germans began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster as the T-20 SAXS opened fire. Artillery strikes from the Soviet positions hit the rear of the column. The infantry fled, trying to escape the fire. Tanks lurched forward, but the narrow forest slowed them. Ivan watched from his cover, breathing heavily, knowing that he had made a difference. His single act of bravery had bought lives, bought time, and changed the outcome of the day. Finally, the clearing went silent. Smoke rose from burning vehicles. The German column had been turned back. Soviet soldiers cheered as they emerged from the trees, rushing to the captured Panzer-38. Ivan remained crouched, staring at the horizon, holding his axe. He had done it. He had saved his regiment. But there was no time to celebrate. Ivan knew the war was far from over. The Germans would return, stronger, angrier. Today had been a victory, yes, but tomorrow would bring another test. And Ivan Sareta, the cook with an axe, would be ready. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Ivan returned to the field kitchen. He stirred the buckwheat again, quietly, almost as if nothing had happened. Soldiers gathered around him, awe in their eyes. The cook who had faced tanks and men alike, who had outsmarted an entire armored column, was still just Ivan. Just a man who understood the power of courage, patience, and cunning. The Germans had underestimated him. They had laughed at the cook with a ladle. But now the forest whispered a new truth. Sometimes the smallest flame can burn the fiercest steel. The forest was still, but the calm was deceptive. Smoke from the captured Panzer-38 hung in the trees like a gray curtain. Birds had long fled, and even the wind seemed hesitant to move. Ivan Sareta crouched behind the iron beast he had captured earlier. His axe rested across his lap. The rifle was at the ready. His eyes scanned the distant road, counting every shadow, every movement. He knew the Germans were coming back. And this time it wouldn't be scouts. This time it would be real. Heavy tanks, mechanized infantry, artillery support. The first Panzer-38 had been only a taste of what awaited him. Hours passed and the silence stretched. Ivan remained vigilant. He did not eat. He did not drink. He listened. Every creak of the trees, every distant rumble told him something. Then he heard it, the unmistakable heavy clank of Tiger tank tracks rolling over frozen earth. Its turret swung slowly, scanning the forest edge. This was no joke. This was a monster, 25 tons of steel and gunpowder, moving with deadly precision. Ivan's heart did not race. It beat steadily as if rehearsed for this exact moment. He had studied the forest, the road, the choke points. He knew every advantage. And he had a plan. The first German infantry squad appeared, rifles raised, moving cautiously around the trees. Ivan's eyes narrowed. He crawled low, pulling 2 anti-tank grenades from his belt. They were heavy, unwieldy metal cubes, the kind that could rip through armor if placed correctly. He rolled one into the path of the lead infantry. It exploded with a deafening bang. Soldiers screamed, scattering into the trees. Panic spread through the unit like wildfire. The Tiger tank advanced slowly, its massive gun aiming at the forest edge. Ivan could see the driver's hands tightening around the controls. He knew they would expect a fight from the rear, from Soviet infantry. They did not expect one man, one cook, one axe, one rifle, to stop them. He moved quickly, silently into the shadows. The forest gave him cover. He circled the tank, looking for a weak spot. Then he spotted it, the rear engine deck, exposed, unprotected. If he could disable it, the Tiger would be trapped. Ivan climbed onto the ferns and rocks, approaching the tank carefully. Each step was calculated. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots, but he moved with patience, timing each step with the rhythm of the tank's engine. One wrong move, one misstep, and death would come instantly. When he reached the rear of the tank, Ivan took a deep breath. He grabbed a bundle of grenades and climbed onto the engine compartment. The tank's metal was cold to the touch, but Ivan's hands were steady. He placed the grenades carefully under the rear hatch, using the shadows to conceal his actions. Then he waited. The Tiger shifted, its massive treads grinding the earth. Inside, the crew was confident, unaware of the danger on their back. Ivan counted silently, 1, 2, 3, and tossed the grenades into the hatch. The explosion was thunderous. Fire erupted from the engine compartment. Smoke choked the forest. The tank lurched violently, its massive guns swinging uselessly. Infantry nearby shouted and ducked for cover. Ivan jumped from the rear deck just as the Tiger spun violently, the roar of its engine filling the forest. He didn't run. He moved to the side of the road, using the ferns and trees as cover. The Germans were disoriented. The tank could not move. The infantry was panicked. And Ivan? He smiled quietly to himself. One man. One axe. One plan. Then from the trees more figures appeared. Soviet T-26 tanks, creeping into position, engines low, ready to ambush. Ivan had bought them time. His actions had delayed the German advance long enough for the regiment to arrive. The forest became alive with the sounds of artillery, gunfire, and shouting. But Ivan was not done. He knew the Germans were regrouping, trying to bring another Tiger into the clearing. He crawled through the underbrush to a hidden trench, pulling out more grenades. His mind worked like a machine. Every tank had a weakness, every soldier a fear. He used both. When the next Tiger appeared, Ivan threw grenades into its path, setting off a chain of explosions. Infantry fell back. The tank lurched, trying to reverse. Ivan ran alongside it, dodging debris and flying metal, shouting, hammering on the hull with his axe to confuse and terrify the crew. They believed a battalion of men surrounded them. They could not see the forest for the smoke, for the fire, for the chaos Ivan had created. By the time the regiment arrived fully, the German column was in disarray. Tanks were disabled, half-tracks overturned, infantry scattered. The clearing had been turned into a trap. And all of it was because of one man, the cook Ivan Sareta. Soldiers emerged from the trees, awe and disbelief on their faces. The legend was real. The man who had captured a Panzer-38 alone had just held an entire Tiger assault at bay until reinforcements arrived. Ivan brushed the snow from his coat and returned quietly to his field kitchen. He stirred the buckwheat as if nothing had happened. A young private approached, eyes wide. "Comrade Sareta, you stopped them?" Ivan did not boast. He nodded slightly. "We all stopped them," he said, eyes on the horizon. "But one man can make the first move." That night, the regiment camped in the clearing. Soldiers huddled around their fires, whispering about the cook with the axe. Stories of his courage spread quickly. Ivan remained quiet, tasting the soup, sharpening his axe, planning for tomorrow. Because tomorrow he knew would be worse. The Germans would return, perhaps with heavier tanks, with artillery, with vengeance. But Ivan Sareta, the man who had been laughed at, the man who had been dismissed as just a cook, had proven one truth. Courage could move mountains, patience could outsmart steel, and one determined soul could change the fate of many. The forest was alive with smoke and echoes of gunfire. The sun had barely risen, yet the clearing was already a battlefield. Ivan Sareta crouched behind a fallen tree, axe in hand, rifle slung across his shoulder. Around him, the remnants of the captured Panzer-38 and the burning half-tracks told the story of the night before. Chaos, fire, and one man's audacity. But the Germans were not finished. Far on the horizon, dust rose in clouds. Engines roared. Dozens of tanks, including Tigers and Panzer IVs, rolled toward the clearing. Mechanized infantry followed, rifles ready, shouting commands over the engines. This was no small skirmish, it was a full assault. Ivan surveyed the forest carefully. He could see the narrow paths the tanks would take, the natural choke points, the places where trees could stop a heavy vehicle. He counted the vehicles, assessed the terrain, and made a decision. He could not fight all of them head-on. Not yet. But he could set traps, create illusions, and delay them long enough for his regiment to strike. He dug quickly into his belt and pulled out grenades and rope. He set tripwires along the narrow paths, using fallen logs to block movement. He poured fuel over debris near the road, ready to ignite it at the right moment. Then he climbed onto a high rock, surveying the advancing column. His eyes narrowed. The first Tiger tank moved into range. He waited. Patience had always been his greatest weapon. When the lead Tiger crossed a tripwire, Ivan lit the fuel. Flames roared into the air, smoke thickening the forest. The tank halted, engines straining against debris. Infantry nearby panicked, unsure of where the attack came from. Ivan moved swiftly through the underbrush, throwing grenades into the path of the next approaching vehicles. Explosions rocked the forest, debris flying in all directions. The German crews were confused. They could not see the attackers. They could only feel the danger closing in. Ivan's voice boomed from the shadows. "Prepare the charges. Anti-tank squad, attack now." The illusion was perfect. The Germans believed the forest was crawling with hundreds of Soviet soldiers. They were terrified. They had no idea it was one man manipulating every element: fire, sound, shadows, fear. Ivan leaped onto the first immobilized tiger. The metal was hot from the burning fuel. Inside, the crew panicked. Ivan struck the turret with his axe, hammering the hatches and vision slits, bending metal, destroying sight, breaking their confidence. The crew inside screamed, helpless and blind. Outside, the infantry froze. Then Ivan moved to the next tank. He crawled under the ferns close to the ground. He rolled a grenade into the path of a Panzer-38, timing it perfectly as the vehicle passed over a narrow log bridge. The explosion rocked the tank, sending it sideways, immobilized. The infantry fell back in confusion. Every move Ivan made was calculated. Every step, every swing of the axe, every grenade thrown created fear. The Germans could not predict him. They could not understand him. He was a ghost, a shadow, a force they could not fight with steel or bullets. From the trees, Soviet T-20 SAXS began to appear, taking positions behind the immobilized German tanks. Artillery fire struck the flanks, catching the mechanized infantry in a deadly crossfire. Ivan watched from his cover, guiding the battle silently, as if he were a conductor orchestrating chaos. One tiger attempted to break through the forest path, its turret swinging violently. Ivan charged. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he climbed onto the engine deck. The crew inside fired, but their aim was poor. Ivan raised his axe and swung, striking the machine gun barrel. The turret spun uselessly. The Germans inside were trapped. Nearby, another tiger fired at the trees, sending shrapnel and splinters flying. Ivan rolled into a ditch, narrowly avoiding death. His coat was torn, hands bleeding, but he did not falter. He threw another grenade into the path of the advancing Panzer-IV, hitting the fuel compartment. Flames erupted, the tank shuddered, and the infantry around it screamed in panic. Hours passed. The Germans tried to regroup, tried to advance, tried to fight back. But Ivan had turned the forest into a maze of death and fear. Every tank that moved forward found obstacles. Every infantry squad encountered hidden traps. And through it all, Ivan remained calm, focused, unstoppable. Finally, the lead German commander realized the forest was lost. His tanks were disabled, his men scattered, and the Soviet forces were closing in. He ordered a retreat. The survivors pulled back, leaving the wreckage of armor, half-tracks, and burned vehicles behind. The forest was silent again, except for the crackle of fires and the distant cheers of Soviet soldiers. Ivan crouched behind a fallen tree, breathing heavily. His hands were blistered, his coat torn, his face streaked with soot and blood. But he was alive. The clearing was won. The Germans had underestimated the cook with an axe, and now they had paid the price. Soldiers emerged from the trees, awe in their eyes. They surrounded him, cheering, lifting him on their shoulders. Ivan shook his head. "We all fought," he said quietly, almost to himself. "One man can start the battle, but it takes many to win it." That night, the soldiers sat around their fires, whispering the legend of Ivan Sareta. The cook who had faced an entire armored assault alone. The man who had captured a Panzer-38. The man who had stopped tigers in their tracks. The forest echoed with the memory of his courage. But Ivan knew the war was far from over. The Germans would return, and the next battle would be even worse. Tanks, artillery, infantry, stronger, faster, more deadly. And Ivan? He would be ready. He had his rifle, his grenades, his axe, and a mind sharper than any steel. The legend of the cook with the axe grew that night, whispered from soldier to soldier. No one laughed at him anymore. No one doubted his courage. He was no longer just a cook. He was a hero. A warrior. A symbol of the unstoppable spirit of those who refused to surrender. The forest was quiet that morning, but the silence was a lie. Ivan Sareta crouched near the edge of the clearing, his breath visible in the cold air. The snow crunched under his boots as he checked his weapons. Rifle, loaded. Grenades ready. Axe sharp. His hands were raw, his body exhausted, but his mind was calm, focused. From the horizon came the familiar rumble, louder this time. Dust and smoke rose in the distance. Ivan's eyes narrowed. The Germans were coming back. Not just a few tanks or scouts, but the full might of an armored column. Tigers, Panzer IVs, half-tracks, artillery units. And they were angry. They had underestimated the cook before and this time they wanted revenge. Ivan did not flinch. He had faced impossible odds before. He had captured a Panzer-38 alone. He had stopped an entire Tiger assault. This would be no different. It would require every ounce of cunning, courage, and speed he possessed. He moved through the trees, scouting the approaching enemy. He marked choke points, narrow paths where tanks could be trapped. He inspected fallen logs, dug shallow trenches and scattered mines left from previous battles. Every step, every action was preparation for the inevitable clash. The first German tank reached the clearing. Ivan ignited a line of fuel, flames roaring high into the sky. The Tiger hesitated, engine straining against fallen trees and debris. The crew inside shouted, trying to regain control. But Ivan was already moving. He rolled a grenade under a half-track and it exploded, throwing metal and smoke into the air. Infantry screamed, panicked, and scattered into the forest. Another Tiger tried to push forward, its massive gun rotating to sweep the trees. Ivan climbed a ridge nearby, using the terrain to his advantage. He aimed carefully and threw a grenade directly into the engine compartment. The tank shuddered violently, smoke pouring from the hatch. But this time the Germans were smarter. They advanced cautiously, sending squads of infantry to flank him, trying to flush him out. Ivan ducked behind a fallen tree, swinging his axe at approaching soldiers. One by one they fell back, terrified by the sheer ferocity of the cook. A Tiger moved into position behind a large boulder. Its turret swung slowly, aiming at the clearing where Ivan had just been. He counted the seconds, waited for the perfect moment, and then leaped into the shadows behind the boulder. The tank fired, the cannon booming, snow flying around him. Ivan rolled to safety, then climbed onto the side of the tank. The metal was hot, the vibration intense. Inside, the crew panicked as Ivan struck the machine gun barrel with his axe. The gun jammed. He hammered at the vision slits, breaking the glass, blinding the crew. The Tiger lurched uncontrollably, spinning in circles. The infantry near the tank froze, unsure whether to attack or retreat. Ivan moved to the next tank, crawling through the snow, hiding behind trees. He planted grenades in the path of the advancing Panzer-IVs. Explosions erupted, scattering soldiers and halting vehicles. He climbed onto a burning half-track, swinging his axe, smashing metal and sending German soldiers diving for cover. From the treeline, the Soviet T-20 began to arrive. They fired from cover, shells striking the immobilized German tanks. Artillery units followed, bombarding the enemy from the rear. The Germans were trapped, caught in a deadly crossfire. Ivan had done it before, but this time the scale was larger. The forest had become a maze of death and fire, and Ivan was at its center, orchestrating the chaos. The Germans tried to regroup, sending a Tiger straight toward the clearing. Ivan's breath was steady. He climbed a high rock and swung his axe at the tracks. Sparks flew as metal met metal. The tank lurched to a stop. Infantry around it froze, realizing they had underestimated the cook once again. Then came the artillery strike. Ivan had predicted it. He led the regiment to a hidden position, directing fire onto the enemy's rear. The shells hit perfectly, destroying fuel trucks, ammunition carts, and half the infantry. The Germans had no choice but to retreat. Their column broke apart, tanks disabled, soldiers fleeing. By the time the smoke cleared, the forest was littered with wreckage. Burned-out Tigers, Panzer-IVs, and half-tracks lay scattered. German infantry were either dead or captured. And in the middle of it all, Ivan Sareta stood, axe in one hand, rifle in the other, bloodied but unbroken. The soldiers emerged from their cover, awe on their faces. "Comrade Sareta, you stopped them all?" whispered a young private. Ivan did not boast. He simply nodded. "We all fought together," he said quietly. "But one man can make the first move." That night the soldiers camped around the fire. Ivan sharpened his axe, cleaned his rifle, and tasted the soup he had prepared earlier. The regiment celebrated quietly, whispering the legend of the cook who had faced an entire German armored column and survived. He was no longer just a cook. He was a hero, a symbol of courage and a living weapon. But Ivan knew the war was far from over. The Germans would return, stronger, faster, and deadlier. And Ivan? He would be ready. He had his mind, his courage, his rifle, and his axe. Nothing else mattered. Winter had gripped the forest. Snow covered the ground like a white blanket, masking the destruction left by previous battles. Ivan Sareta stood near his field kitchen, axe in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. The previous German attacks had tested him, pushed him to his limits, But the man who laughed in the face of Panzer-38 and Tiger tanks was not afraid. Reports had come in. The Germans were sending everything they had left. Tigers, Panthers, mechanized infantry, artillery, an entire battalion. They wanted revenge. They wanted to crush the Soviet forces in one final push. And Ivan? He would be waiting. He walked through the trenches checking on his soldiers. Young men barely older than boys, shivering in the cold, weapons in hand. Their faces showed fear but also hope. They knew their cook, once laughed at, now revered, would lead them. Ivan's eyes softened. Keep your heads low. Watch your corners. Trust your training and your courage. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. Then the distant rumble began. The earth shook slightly. Smoke rose on the horizon. Ivan crouched behind a fallen tree, calculating every move. This time the enemy was massive, better equipped, and smarter. He could not rely on surprise alone. He had to fight with every ounce of his skill and instinct. The first wave came at dawn. Tigers rolled over frozen soil, their guns trained toward the clearing. Panzer IVs followed, infantry squads spread along the tree line. Artillery fire pounded the snow, sending fragments of ice and dirt flying. Ivan's regiment fired from cover, but their firepower alone was not enough. He needed to act. He sprinted across the clearing, axe in one hand, rifle slung across his shoulder. He swung it against the side of the lead Tiger, hammering vision slits and bending the barrel of its machine gun. The crew inside screamed, unable to aim or see. Flames from previous explosions licked at the snow. The Germans were stunned. The legend of the cook with the axe had returned in full force. Ivan ducked behind a ridge, tossing grenades at advancing tanks. Explosions rocked the forest, sending vehicles off course. Infantry soldiers tried to flank him, but he met them head-on, axe swinging, rifle firing. His movements were precise, swift, almost inhuman. Every soldier, every tank, every element of the enemy's plan fell apart under his assault. From the tree-line, Soviet T-20 SIXS and artillery struck the immobilized tanks. Flames erupted from fuel trucks, smoke filling the air. The Germans tried to regroup, but Ivan was relentless. He climbed onto a Panther tank, the metal burning under his boots. He struck the turret, bending steel, blinding the crew, turning the machine into a useless hulk. Hours passed. Snow fell harder, obscuring visibility. The German command attempted one last push, concentrating their forces on the clearing. Ivan anticipated every move. He led his soldiers through hidden paths, using the terrain to trap tanks and isolate infantry. He planted mines, rolled grenades, and struck where they least expected. The forest was alive with chaos, fire, and smoke. At one point, a Tiger fired directly at Ivan's position. He rolled into the snow, narrowly avoiding the blast. His coat was torn, hands bleeding, breath ragged. He rose, gripping his axe. "For my men," he whispered, and charged. The final German tank moved into the center of the clearing. Ivan climbed onto its hull, swinging his axe with all his strength. Sparks flew as metal met iron. The crew panicked, trapped and blinded by the destruction around them. Ivan hammered at the turret, at the barrel, at every weak point he could reach. The tank lurched and stopped. Victory felt close, but he knew the battle was not yet done. From the distance, Soviet reinforcements arrived, guided by the intelligence Ivan had gathered in previous battles. Tanks, infantry, artillery, they moved into position, surrounding the remaining German forces. With Ivan's leadership and daring, the Soviet regiment now had the upper hand. The Germans realized they could not win. Their battalion commander ordered a retreat. Tanks, once proud and unstoppable, limped away or were abandoned. Infantry scattered, captured, or surrendered. The forest fell silent again, except for the crackle of burning vehicles and the heavy breathing of soldiers who had survived. Ivan Sareta stood alone in the clearing, axe in hand, surveying the destruction. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with soot and blood. He was exhausted, every muscle aching, but he was alive. Around him, soldiers emerged from the trees, cheering, lifting him on their shoulders. The man once mocked for holding a ladle was now a legend. The colonel approached him, holding the maps and intelligence Ivan had recovered from captured tanks. "You saved the regiment," he said, awe in his voice. "We would have been destroyed without you." Ivan shook his head. "We all fought," he replied. "I only started the fire." That evening the soldiers gathered around the fire. Ivan sat, axe by his side, tasting the soup he had prepared earlier. He listened to their whispers, their stories, their reverence. He did not smile. He knew the war was far from over, but this battle, this one, was won. Months later, Ivan would be recognized by the Soviet High Command. Awards, medals and honors came to him. The Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor, was pinned to his chest. But Ivan did not care for glory. He cared for his men, for the lives he had saved, for the spirit of resistance he had shown. Even as the war dragged on, Ivan Tsarita remained at the front, leading his soldiers with the same courage, the same determination, the same unwavering spirit. The axe, once a simple tool, became a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and the power of one determined man to change the course of history. Years later, long after the war had ended, Ivan returned to his village. He was celebrated as a hero, yet he walked quietly, humbly, with memories of smoke, fire, and frozen forests etched forever in his mind. He had faced steel, blood, and death and had survived. The forest may have forgotten the battle, the snow may have covered the tracks, but the legend of the cook with the axe endured. Soldiers told his story. Children whispered it. And in the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow, a small corner was dedicated to him. The man who faced the might of German armor with nothing but courage, a rifle, and an axe. Ivan Tsarita had proven one thing: it does not matter what weapon you hold. What matters is the fire in your heart, the courage in your soul, and the will to fight when all odds are against you. And as long as that fire burned, heroes could rise from the most unlikely places, even from a humble kitchen in a snowy forest.